You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Hilliard MacBeth, CEO of the MacBeth Group in Edmonton and author of the book, When the Bubble Burst, Surviving the Canadian Real Estate Crash. Welcome to the show, Hilliard.
Nice to be on your show again.
It sounds like this weekend the Prime Minister is going to drop the election writ, pushing us into one of the longest election campaigns in Canadian history, 11 weeks until the October 19th election. I can't imagine what I might be doing that day except voting, but they must have plans. Any idea on how this election campaign and the economy are going to mix?
Well, I think the incumbent Conservative government must be worried. I'm sure they are worried that the economic news is going to gradually get worse as we head towards October. The GDP number comes out tomorrow for May, and then on September 1st for June, and then there'll be another one on October 1st. So they're going to have 3 readings. And so far this year, the first 4 readings up to April have all been a contraction. So they don't like to use the recession word. In fact, it's like this amazing dance they do to talk around the R word, but we're going to find out fairly soon, probably as soon as tomorrow, whether it's a recession. And if it is a recession, I don't know. Do governments get reelected in recessions? I don't think they do. But I haven't checked every single recession and every single election, but it's difficult.
Now, we have Joe Oliver, the finance minister, telling us, look, forget about these figures you've seen from the TD Bank and so on. Canada is not in a recession. What if all the economic data says we are?
Yeah, I don't know how he can say that. Both TD and I forget which one other bank both said that we're technically in a recession now. Now, recessions are, the definition of a recession is pretty technical, and you could say, well, it's not a really bad recession, but I think the concern is that we're struggling to replace the energy sector with exports from manufacturing. The energy sector again today, Cenovus, which is a big oil sands company spun off from Alberta Energy Company, which became Encana, announced a very large layoff of people today, a further reduction, and yesterday Suncor announced a further reduction in spending. So now the good news is Suncor yesterday said that they've got their cost down from $34 to $28, which is a phenomenal improvement in cost. It's almost 20% improvement. But the bad news is they're doing it by cutting people and cutting money. So that doesn't help the economy grow. So the hope was that maybe manufacturing in Ontario or something else, lumber from BC, would pick up the slack. But the energy sector is pretty big, and if you combine that with the slowdown in real estate, that would be very difficult to not experience at least a mild recession.
Now, Vancouver and Toronto still have seen climbing real estate numbers, but the rest of Canada not so bright, is it?
No, and you know what? I just got this today. It's from TD Economics, and the headline is Assessing the Risk of a Disorderly Home Price Correction in Toronto and Vancouver. And I just finished reading it. And they're talking about the possibility of a correction in Vancouver and Toronto, which is amazing. I hadn't seen that before. And one of their concerns, they mentioned, for instance, that Vancouver is a very volatile housing market. I haven't heard that before too often, but it is true that I guess the prices in Vancouver fluctuate more widely than in other jurisdictions. And in Toronto, they're concerned about overbuilding. There's a tremendous amount of condos, and the construction of condos continues in Toronto, and even in Vancouver, there's actually quite a bit of construction. One thing they highlighted about Vancouver is there's a large number of unsold and unoccupied units of housing in Vancouver, which everybody knows, I guess, even more than in Toronto, which is an amazing stat because, I don't know, Vancouver's less than half the size of population of Toronto, but there's a tremendous number of, so if for example those people in Vancouver and Toronto that were sitting on these unsold units probably as a speculation or an investment or whatever decided that the price wasn't likely to go any higher, it might start to go lower, and they were all to change their mind and become sellers rather than holders, that would change the dynamic quite significantly. But the report concludes that it's likely to be a soft landing, not a hard landing.
So a minor adjustment, 5-10%?
Yes, and the problem with soft landings is Jim, you and I may have talked about soft landings before, because it's one of the things I get on a bit of a rant about. But there really is no evidence of a soft landing anywhere after a bubble. It just doesn't happen, and the reason is mathematically to get back. And in the report, it even says, I was quite interested. It said that it would take a 40% correction to get back to the long-term trend line, which is almost exactly the same numbers that I put in my book. So that if you think about it mathematically, what they're saying is house prices are too high and incomes are too low. So that would mean that if, say, incomes grew by 2% a year and house prices were flat, that would mean 20 years of a soft landing. Well, there's just no way that that's possible. You're going to have several recessions and all kinds of stuff is going to go on in 20 years. So unless you somehow could manufacture very rapid increases in household incomes so that people could once again afford a house in Vancouver, I know it's hard to imagine, it's more likely that the house prices have to come down. And if they come down anything more than the number you mentioned, 5 to 10%, then you're into a hard landing, because that's when people start to get into problems with the borrower and the lender and the mortgage company and all that kind of stuff. And then you're talking foreclosure and all kinds of nasty stuff that follows after that.
We'll have more with Hilliard MacBeth right after this.
More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Hilliard MacBeth, author of the book When the Bubble Burst, Surviving the Canadian Real Estate Crash. Well, what's happening? You said there's a Home Capital story that affects mostly Toronto, but tell us that one.
Home Capital is a company based in Toronto. They own a subsidiary, Home Trust, and they lend money. This is their business model. They lend money to people who have been turned down by the banks. So sometimes, for example, one of the things they use is if somebody doesn't have a regular paycheck but happens to own a business, like the example might be a taxi driver, for example, or something like that, and they couldn't really come up with that T4 to qualify for a loan, Home Capital will work with them to sort of reconstruct their balance sheet and reconstruct their income statement, and then is able to provide them with lending. So they're called alternative lenders, and they've been extremely successful up until recently. They had, for instance, on the stock market, the stock had gone from $5 maybe 10 years ago to over $50. And then in July the 10th, and Friday night, after the market closed, they announced that they had discovered there had been some fraud from some of the mortgage brokers, actually 45 of the mortgage brokers that were originating these loans, and were finding these people for them, and they had to shut them down. They had to sever the ties with these people. And it turned out that it was like 11% of their total mortgage supply in the fiscal year 2014. So then today, so that was July 10th. So today, July 30th, 20 days later, they had the release of the results and the conference call. And it was interesting. If anybody is interested in these things, to go on the website and listen to the question and answer period. It's quite an entertaining thing. At one point, the CEO was yelling at one of the analysts, I think he's from RBC, because he asked a question that the CEO didn't like. And so the stock has rallied because the CEO has convinced people that maybe things are okay after all, but it really doesn't seem likely. There's probably more problems that... So it gets back to what we were talking about before. If people can't afford the housing at this price, then people in the industry are going to reach. They're going to stretch and maybe break the rules or bend the rules a little bit in order to get people to qualify for those loans. And,
now, I think there's something new from CMHC. They'll consider income from a secondary suite as part of your mortgage package.
Yeah, I saw that. I didn't quite understand that, but I think. I mean, we're going to find out, I think, after this Home Capital thing. Obviously, these mortgage brokers weren't just dealing with Home Capital. They would be originating mortgages for a number of lenders. I don't know who. None of this has been revealed yet, but we're going to find out, I'm sure, that all kinds of creative and extraordinary measures have been taken.
Yes, that's how they'd explain it. We were being creative. Now, was this a conspiracy of 45 different mortgage brokers, or was it just they found 45 other brokers were doing this?
Well, what happened was, this gets really interesting. They got an anonymous letter. A letter was sent anonymously to the board of directors, not to the management of the company, not to the executives of the company, but to somebody on the board of directors, or maybe to everybody on the board of directors, saying that they knew that this was going on, and they felt that the board of directors should know about this. So that sort of indicates possibly that they didn't trust the management with that information. They wanted to make sure that it got to the board of directors. And then one thing I left out was that one of the board of directors members, a man named Bailey, resigned between July 10th and today. He resigned. He used to be the chairman of the Ontario Securities Commission and was a senior lawyer in Toronto and highly regarded. And he'd only recently joined the board of directors in the last couple of years. And it said that he resigned for personal reasons. So there's definitely a lot of questions swirling around this, and I think the CEO tried to answer the questions today, but it's almost as if he created new questions as fast as he was answering the other ones. And but you go back to the fundamentals on it. If people can't afford these houses, they'll and think about the people working in the industry. They probably have mortgages themselves, right? They've got big mortgage payments, and they're desperately trying to find business that they can originate, and they get paid a fee for originating or a commission or whatever. And so if they can't find people who easily qualify, they start dipping into the pool of people who marginally qualify, and then I guess they crossed over wherever the line is, kind of a gray line probably. And they just went a little bit too far. So this letter alleged that these people were committing fraud, and when they did the checks, they found out that the information in the letter was correct, and that's when they severed the ties with the 45 mortgage brokers. But 45 mortgage brokers with a very large volume of business, 11% of their total business. So that's why the stock dropped from 57 down to 28. And today it's actually rallied back up into the low 30s because people, I guess, were reassured that with some of the answers on the call. But I'm pretty sure this story isn't over yet. This is and of course, apparently these mortgage brokers, according to the conference call, these mortgage brokers are still in business. So they're still originating loans. So Home Capital stopped taking business from them, but other people are still taking business from them, which raises a whole new level of other questions.
Farmland and the drought that's hit Western Canada. What's happening in that situation?
Well, the most amazing thing happened over the last 10 years in Saskatchewan and Alberta. So in Alberta, there's lots of farmland, but a fairly significant amount of farmland in Alberta is fairly close to a major center like Red Deer or Calgary or Edmonton. So people convince themselves that maybe someday it'll be converted into housing. So the price had been creeping up into the $1,000 an acre. And you probably know that you can't possibly get enough wheat or barley or canola off that land to justify paying $1,000 when you have to buy all the fertilizer and all the seed and all the diesel for the equipment, and you got to have that new combine every once in a while. So, but in Saskatchewan, it's different because if the farm is miles away from Saskatoon or Regina, there's no way that people can convince themselves that somehow that's going to eventually become housing, where it would be more valuable. It's always going to be farmland. So even there, prices, I don't know the exact numbers, but just to give you some idea, the last 4 years, 3 out of the 4 years, the price increases were more than 20%. 1 year, I think 2 years ago, was 28%, and last year it dipped below 20%. The prices were only up 19%. So that means the price per acre had almost reached $1,000 an acre, and up from $300-400 an acre up to close to $1,000, which really makes no sense. And for the first time ever, I shouldn't say ever, for the first time in a long, long time, other than during the global financial crisis, briefly in 08-09, prices dropped, and then now they're dropping again for farmland. And it's the first time ever. Now, the last time they dropped 60% from $1,000 an acre, was peaked out in the peak in the early 80s, down to under $400 an acre. So it was actually a little bit over 60%. And that's what it needs, depending on what the price for the products are, the farm receipts. So we could be seeing, I talked to a former banker on Monday, and I asked him how the banking system is handling the energy meltdown because obviously there's some loans out in the oil and gas industry. And he brought up farming. He said these farms borrow a lot of money in the spring, and then they try and repay it in the fall. But if they have a bad year or drought, unless they've got insurance and they happen to get hit with hail, they can't pay back the loans. So this is a whole new area of concern. And we started out talking about the election. Imagine going into election with people upset because they're worried about the energy sector, and then on top of that, you got a bunch of upset farmers who are, I guess, more likely to vote Conservative than any other way.
And Alberta, of course, with the NDP winning the election there, people in the most conservative province are not scared to vote for those lefties.
Yeah, and that, we couldn't have, nobody, as far as I know, nobody predicted that. And so we don't know what's going to happen this federal election, especially in 11 weeks. That saying about the battle plan lasts until the first shot is fired, and then it's immediately obsolete. And I think 11 weeks is a long time. No matter what their plan is, there's an awful lot going to happen, whether it be in the farm sector, the energy sector, the economy, with the dreaded R word that Joe Oliver won't speak out loud. It's going to be very interesting. But the Conservatives might get lucky if the Liberals and the NDP split the vote, so what happened in Alberta was the Liberal vote completely evaporated, and that allowed the NDP to win. If the Liberals had got their normal 25 to 30% of the vote, which they had up until this last election, there's no way the NDP could have gotten in. So it's possible that the Conservatives may get lucky on the federal side. If both the NDP vote and the Liberal vote hold up, then they're splitting the left vote, and Conservatives, since Harper managed to combine the Reform Party and the Progressive Conservative Party, they're not splitting the vote on the right wing. So they might just squeak through one more time. But I don't know. I think people are probably ready for a change.
Well, I think the NDP might be chipping in for those anti-Justin Trudeau ads where we have a committee selecting the Prime Minister. Apparently, in the Conservative world, we don't vote for Prime Minister anymore. This committee selects the Prime Minister. But the NDP isn't being mentioned in any of the Conservative ads yet. No,
and it's interesting that you bring that up because there was a really strange thing that happened in Alberta in the debate. And I don't know if there was only one debate. I only remember watching one debate, but everybody thought that the Conservative leader was going to attack the Wild Rose leader. And during the debate, he just turned his back on the Wild Rose leader and directed all of his questions and all of his attacks on the NDP. And that wasn't the first sign that the NDP were a threat, but it certainly confirmed that there was something going on. And then the NDP leader, Rachel Notley, held her own, did quite well, and then it was basically that was it. It was history after that. So maybe the Conservatives in Ottawa, the federal party, learned from that, and they're not going to even mention the NDP. But sooner or later, they're going to have to deal with it, I suppose. And I think the first debate comes up fairly early in this election campaign, sometime early in August, I think.
Right, and Harper is not taking part in the national TV network debates. He's going to go to one sponsored by magazines or newspapers.
Oh, boy. He gave an interview yesterday, I think it was, and it was on Bloomberg TV. And as you probably know, Bloomberg TV is about 3 months old. It's brand new. Bloomberg was up until recently, I always had a Bloomberg terminal for years on my desk as a stock trading and research tool. And then they sort of branched out into broader news categories under the Bloomberg terminal, but it's still very much a trader's tool. And for some reason in Canada, they decided to launch a TV station. And so the first interview that the Prime Minister does in years, he gives to the Bloomberg TV. So I don't understand it at all. I mean, I think if you were CTV or Rogers or one of those other people or CBC, you'd be pretty upset that you didn't get a chance to interview them. Maybe not, though. I don't know how that works exactly.
And you have to have a subscription to Bloomberg to get it as well. It's a pay service. It doesn't come on your regular channel package.
Oh, yeah.
So it's a select audience.
Yeah, the one I watch. I like it because I like the U.S. news, and sometimes CNBC is difficult because they used to have so much Republican politics on there. But I haven't seen the Canadian channel yet. I don't even think it's in our cable package.
Well, I think mine is the American Bloomberg. I haven't seen anything about a Canadian Bloomberg channel.
No.
And how is Rachel Notley doing as Premier? Has she chased business out of Alberta? Have you heard anything about that?
Well, it's an amazing thing. It's almost like a silence. There's just really very little. The biggest thing that's happened so far is this royalty review panel, and that was about a few weeks ago. And there's been no mention since then. They did the announcement of this thing, and they appointed the head of the Alberta Treasury Branch, a government-owned bank, to run it. A fellow named Dave Mowat. He's actually from Vancouver. He was the head of the credit union Van City out there. And but they haven't announced any new panels members on that royalty review. And I just ran into a friend of mine this morning who works at the legislature. I said, "So how are they doing? How are the NDP doing?" And he said, because he's involved in the rules of the legislature, all the little traditions that they have, and how things actually work in the committees and the parliamentary procedure and all that. He said, "Well, almost none of them have ever been in the legislature before, and they appointed a speaker for the House." He said, "He's a very smart, very nice guy, but he's never been in the legislature before." So I was thinking back to when the Conservatives were in there in the early days. They had all kinds of people that had worked in government for quite a long time and knew all of the ins and outs of how government works. So it's going to be challenging for the NDP. And the other problem they're having, they've also announced they're going to fill up the health board, which was a board that was fired by the previous government very precipitously, and it had a number of very heavyweight business people on it, and they were really upset that they got fired, so they're having trouble, I understand, finding members to serve on that board as well. The chair of the University of Alberta Board of Governors has resigned, and there's no announcement of a replacement there. So, I don't know. It's maybe the NDP doesn't know anybody to ask to fill these boards. And maybe it's not that important that they fill these positions right away. But it is kind of a vacuum, I guess, if you like. That and there's a lot of things happening in Alberta. As the announcements from Suncor and Cenovus indicate, there's a lot of things happening in Alberta that probably need some pretty urgent attention.
Right, and all these rookies still asking, "Where's the washroom? Where do I hang my coat?" Exactly.
It's I think what the NDP needs to do is they need to reach out beyond their circle of friends, if you like, who probably generally don't have a lot of experience in government and in business. Maybe some of them have experience in government, but a lot of them probably don't have that much experience in business. And everybody's going to have to swallow their pride a little bit and say, "Well, I don't know you, but we have to work together to get through this next couple of years, because it's going to be a tough couple of years." And I think people would be willing to do that. I'm sure that there would be some people that wouldn't. They'd say, "Oh no, I'm never working for an NDP government," But there would be some smart people that would be willing to do that. And so it's sort of like that thing where, at the high school dance, where the boys are all at one wall and the girls are all at the other wall. They gotta somebody's got to start the process. I don't know, but hopefully fairly soon, because the government, every government needs to get some advice from outside of government circles. Government circles tend to get really ingrown and really insular, and they need to get advice from the private sector. And so somebody's got to figure out a way to do it.
Hilliard, thank you very much for chatting with us.
Nice to be on the show again.
My guest has been Hilliard MacBeth, CEO of the MacBeth Group in Edmonton and author of the book, When the Bubble Burst, Surviving the Canadian Real Estate Crash. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. You can forward comments to the show to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.